I'm Eric Cooper. I'm the president and CEO of the San Antonio Food Bank. I'm one of the Feeding America food banks across the United States that are working to put food on the table for struggling Americans. We package our work into 3 areas of food for today, which really nourishes people immediately, and food for tomorrow, which is really about household stabilization, and then food for a lifetime, which is trying to move families to self-sufficiency and self-reliance. We believe our mission is to feed the line, but it is also to shorten the line, and we're taking that comprehensive approach to try to meet people's basic needs. I think for us at the San Antonio Food Bank, being one of the food banks in the great state of Texas, it's sometimes sad and humbling that things are always a little bigger in Texas, and the issue of food insecurity is huge. We tend to rank number 2 in the number of hungry people in our state, and there's 254 counties. The food bank here in San Antonio covers 29 counties. And pre-pandemic, we fed 60,000 people a week, and it's always a challenge to try to meet that need. We were often rationing food, trying to get it to everyone that was in need. But then COVID-19 occurred, and quickly we saw a lot of our food resources start to shrink. The food industry, the supply chain, it was all impacted. A lot of loss of jobs, restaurants closed, places we typically pick up from said, we don't need you today, we don't even have customers. At the same time, our demand started to double. We went from 60,000 people a week to 120,000 people a week, and to be honest, it was crazy. It was a lot of anxiety and fear. All of us throughout the world were trying to deal with this virus and how to stay safe and how to continue to operate, and people need to eat, and we responded, and I think our community was incredible. My team, staff, I think of those moments when people were running from this crisis. My team and volunteers were running towards it, and it has been a miracle, truly, to see the generosity, the heroic actions of so many to help a neighbor. And I think that has not just nourished body, but soul, spirit, and it makes us optimistic for what we could potentially do in the future. I kind of sit in the crossroads between those that have resources and those that need resources. And I always think that we serve the entire community, both sides, those that can give help and those that need to get help. But there's this transformative aspect of service and giving that tends to be often that we get back more than we are giving. And I think the power of service can be so transformative, and it's in those moments when our life is upside down and when we feel like the weight of the world is going to crush us, that the quickest and easiest way to lighten our load is actually to take the burdens of someone else on our back. And that's counterintuitive. You would think someone else's weight would surely just smother you, but what ends up happening is your load is all of a sudden lightened, and it gives you this new perspective. It gives you a view of your own trials in a different way. In some ways, it heals you. It cures what was broken or damaged. And I see that experience in the volunteers that come and help. That, in the pandemic, I met a wonderful woman that, was gainfully employed, but told, hey, we don't need you at the office, do your work from home. And in doing that, she became alone. She became isolated. She would log on to her computer at her house every morning and work a full week, and then on the weekends, brave her way over to the grocery store to get her food, and she would go home and feeling like she wasn't supposed to be out, she shouldn't be out, it was just for those essential things. And then she saw our ad, call for volunteers, and the fact that we needed help and volunteers were considered essential workers. And she said, my company won't let me go to work and see people, maybe I could go and volunteer. And it was just up the road from where she lived at a sports arena that we call the Alamo Dome here in San Antonio. And she came out there for one of our mega distributions where thousands of families would come to get food, and she could work on the front lines loading cars with groceries. She became, in a way, physically distant but socially connected, right? In that pandemic environment where it was easy for her to feel alone, now she became a part of something much bigger than herself. She met other volunteers that were actually in the same circumstance, working from home, feeling alone, and they became friends, they became connected. And so every week at our distributions, their second time out of their house, besides getting food for themselves, they would then give food to those that didn't have. And she said, it just gave me something to look forward to. And she said, I've learned at these distributions that the best place to be is actually at the end of the line. She said, because it's when you're putting the groceries, the finishing items into the trunk, you close the trunk, and you get from the family that received the food these blessings from God. You get, thank you, we love you, thank you for being here. And she said, I feel so special because I was here. And she goes, I feel greedy because I'm the one getting all of this feedback from such grateful people. And she said, I know I'm making a difference. And she said, I could die tomorrow and know that I made the planet a better place. And I mean, that's what service is all about. If there's a poster child for the San Antonio Food Bank and who we provide food to, she's Hispanic, she's a mom, she's a hard worker, she has a job, she's taken for granted, she isn't paid enough to pay all of her bills and have money left over for food. She doesn't like to ask for help. She doesn't want to come too often because she believes she might be taking food from someone else. But it's usually in those critical moments when her babies are hungry that she asks for help. And often that's automobile expense, the car breaks down, utility bills are high, it's a hot Texas summer. She's trying to provide for her kids for Christmas, and all of those expenses just are tough to meet. She loves her family, and she'll do anything for them. For the last 2 decades, I feel like for many food banks, it's the working poor. That's who we feed. In some ways, we're a part of the benefits package of a low-wage employer, which is sad when you think of it. Someone that has a job, but in some ways, you better get used to getting food from the food bank because it's the only way you're going to make it. I think oftentimes people are surprised to hear that those that come to the food bank have jobs. I think oftentimes I'm told, Eric, you can give them a fish and you can feed them for a day, but if you teach them to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. And I would respond, well, if you don't pack a tuna fish sandwich, she won't meet you at the dock. She can't. Her babies are hungry. It's not a or equation, it's an and. You really have to provide the fish while you're teaching to fish, and you have to do the research to know that the fishing industry actually pays, because it's just not productive to pursue instability or lack of sustainability. So when I think of a living wage, I tend to think of meaningful employment. It's employment that offers all of the amenities that we need. Adam Smith is the father of capitalism, and it was truly a strategy to reduce poverty. It was to create opportunity, and we have a choice as businesses on how we will provide for our employees, and I think more needs to be done to make sure minimums are met so that people's basic needs are taken care of so we can all thrive. And in the sense of the American dream, I believe it's still obtainable, But I do believe that the road has gotten longer. And the road has gotten longer with more obstacles and barriers that for some can seem unachievable. Definitely there's on-ramps to that road to the American dream for many that are privileged that can get them there quicker and sooner and can be a reality. But for so many that we come in contact with at the food bank, the length of that road can be pretty hopeless. So I definitely think that, to me, the American dream is opportunity. When I think of food, it's everything. Food's love, it's nourishment, it's what our bodies need for fuel. It's culture, it's tradition, it's the holidays. Many of us, probably our first date was over a meal. The opportunity to enjoy flavor can take you to memories and places that are so powerful. And when you think of not having that, the absence of those ingredients that make you feel complete, it makes you feel less than. And I think for many, that's a haunting place. And to think of someone that their cupboards are bare, their refrigerator's empty, a parent who wants to nourish their child but can't because they don't have the food. It's being desperate, it's hopeless. And so in some ways, food is that hope that I'm not sure what tomorrow might bring, but today I feel full. Back in April, when the pandemic was unraveling our economy and so much carnage of job loss and anxiety and stress, and our organization just trying to respond and trying to figure out the logistics, but setting up distribution sites that we knew would go from our normal work from the hundreds to the thousands, but we had no idea that 10,000 families, 10,000 cars, 50,000 people would be coming, ask for help. And the food supply needed to meet that, the volunteers, the logistics, the coordinations to ultimately be what we think was the largest mass distribution of food in America, and set us in a place where I think helped us understand the impact of this pandemic, that it was going to hit families, it was going to be at the core of communities, that it would take people to basic needs needing to be met. And I think of all the images of other crises and downturns, the soup lines, the depression, the aerial photo of cars waiting in line, said more than the data and the statistics could ever say. It reminded us that all of us have to eat, and our ability to put food on the table would be challenged in the pandemic. We were serving as fast as we could, and the husband and wife were just like, God bless you. We are just so grateful that you're here, that you're able to help us. And I said, well, tell me about your family. And the husband said, well, my wife and I met at a hotel downtown. I got up enough courage to ask her out. She agreed, and we started dating, got married. We bought our home. We started our family. He mentioned he worked evenings and she worked during the day so they could juggle the child care for their 3 kids. And he said they knew something was wrong when the general manager at the hotel called them both in at the same time. And he said, we usually don't work the same shift. And so all the employees at the hotel were there, and he said, we don't have guests, which means we don't have money, which means you don't have jobs. And every employee at that hotel was let go that day. And he said they got in their car and drove home, worried about their health care and if they were going to get the virus, and how would they get their bills paid, their mortgage, how were they going to pay their car payment on their minivan they were driving that day, and how would they feed their children? I met their 3 kids. Their heads popped up along the back bench of the minivan as I was loading the groceries, and all so excited, saying, "Mom, we're getting some tomatoes." And I thought, this child is excited about tomatoes, but what a privilege to be there in that moment and to be there with volunteers that were helping a neighbor strengthen their home, strengthen their hope by providing a simple thing like some produce. It changed me, it changed our city, and it changed the country and the nation. It wasn't until that night I got home and I was answering emails and saw the same picture that I think many saw throughout the world, and that was the aerial photo. William Luther was the photographer for the Express News that captured that image, and it quickly got me on Dr. Phil and the Today Show and the London Times and the New Zealand something or another, and people wanted to understand what happened that day. And all I can say is it was love. It was love. It was the greatest demonstration of love that I've ever witnessed, and that's where people are nourished. Now, when you think about food insecurity or hunger, when you think about is there enough food to feed those that are hungry, it's important to know that hunger is really just a symptom of poverty. People in poverty have lots of issues. It's complex. Maybe they're unemployed or underemployed. Maybe they've had their utilities shut off, domestic violence, divorce. But someone that's hungry just has one issue. And until you solve that one issue, you can't start to address this complexity of poverty. And so it starts with a meal. It's those progressions that really start then to help you see and how deep-rooted poverty can be. It really stems from systemic racism. The fact that our city grew in a way that created the haves and the have-nots and kept the have-nots in an environment where their assets didn't fully appreciate. And, I can be even more direct. It was the Hispanics. If you were brown, you could not own land in this area of town. It was zoned that way. It was deeded that way. Later, the federal government redlined it and said, these communities aren't worthy of loans. And so because of no loans, there were no codes, there was no building ordinances. Shanties, subpar housing was built and still exists today. And when you think of the greatest driver of wealth for families in America, and you think of that American dream, it's the home with the white picket fence. These homes have no fence. Maybe if they're lucky, it's chain link, but that value of that asset when compared to other homes and other sides of our community just didn't progress. They didn't appreciate. And so families have been held back. And I think that road is just so long for many. What are the other barriers? So much of it is in the area of employment, housing, education, and then access to care. The environment right now in the United States, if you were to talk to many business owners, they'd say there's a labor issue. I'm trying to hire, I don't know a business that isn't. Well, before people are going to take those jobs, how much does it pay? How will they manage their child care? And have we resolved concerns around the virus? We have this opportunity, I think, to change our destination. And it's, for me, at the food bank, we fed 60,000 people a week before the pandemic, 120,000 people during the pandemic, and we too want to get back to normal. But what is normal? And what should that destination be? Should we go back to feeding 60,000 people a week? Or do we know better? Can we hope for something more holistic, more nourishing, a shorter line? I think of all the lessons we've learned in the pandemic. I think of, again, our client. She's always gone to work sick. She's had to. If she didn't show up at work, she didn't get her hourly wage and she couldn't make her rent. So she's always been there sick. Well, during the pandemic, we said, look, if you're sick, stay home. And to keep others safe, we're going to have a thermometer at work. So check in, let's check your temp. Oh, you've got a fever, go home. Please protect our customers. Please protect your coworkers. Stay home. The importance of sick leave, the importance of making sure that she has a wage that will offset her heroic act of not coming to work sick, right? Her efforts to protect her coworkers, she stays home. And now I think sometimes people are saying, well, no, if we give sick leave, she'll just abuse it. She'll just use it. You know, we've learned better. And if we are going to change our destination, we're going to have to change our policies, we're going to have to change our benefit packages, we're going to have to think more strategically and provide sustainable, meaningful employment. Ultimately, that's the biggest barrier to moving families forward. I've seen miracles happen daily in the work that I have the privilege of being a part of. And so it's witnessing those miracles that keeps me optimistic that if you believe it can't happen, just work hard enough, just try. Sometimes things don't come together. There's that reality of the hard knocks, but I am optimistic. I just know for our organization, there's a reason why we're doing this interview. And if I only talk about our need for a canned good to solve the hunger crisis, shame on me. The bigger the stage, the bigger the sermon. And families need a higher wage if they're going to pay the bills and put food on their table. They need quality education, and education that's affordable, that's accessible. Basic needs have to be met, and we need to think of our neighbor as family. If it's your child, if it's your brother, if it's your cousin, if it's an uncle, if it's your mom, how would you act? What's your tolerance? What's your acceptance? I always think of that Confucius quote of like, what I hear, I forget, what I see, I remember, I understand. And I invite anyone to do, to serve, to walk with me, to see, to experience. And I think it's through understanding that we will have impact. As I mentioned, I know we won't solve hunger with a canned good. It's by building a community of compassion, and compassion will come when understanding is achieved. And I hope then none of us can tolerate a loved one going without. My background was business. I was an entrepreneur. I had lots of goal-oriented aspirations and knew that there was going to be an opportunity that would somehow come clear to me. And while I was making my way in that business world, had a life situation where my parents got divorced and my dad became estranged from our family, and several years had gone by and no one had communicated with him. And I saw how his departure left my mom in a tough place. Again, when I think of our clients, I think of my mom, female, 2 kids, still at home, trying to pay the mortgage, put food on the table. And I did what I could to help my mom and my little brother and sister, but mostly what I did was just become angry at my dad, feeling like he had shirked his responsibilities. And when I went to try to connect with him, we couldn't find him. We knew he'd worked for a company in Oregon, and that's about all we knew. This was well before cell phones had taken off, and Al Gore hadn't invented the internet. Couldn't Facebook friend anybody. Did what I could. I called the IRS, police departments, missing persons, but ultimately flew to Oregon for the first time in my life. Went to the city where his business was, that he worked for, and the apartments that he once lived at, and both had shared that he hadn't been there in a year and a half, but I thought at least I could start there. And I took some flyers that had his photo and my phone number, and just thought I might be able to, at least connect with somebody. And after spending a few days on the streets there in Portland, I found my dad, and I found him homeless on the streets. And my dad and I, when our eyes met, he came running, and when he got to me, he just said, "Son, I knew you would come." And looking at him and his condition, and I said, "Well, you look hungry." And we went to a Denny's to go grab a bite to eat, and it was in this Denny's that my life changed. We were greeted by a maitre d' who welcomed us both, but looked at me and then looked at my dad and looked back at me and asked if I wanted a table for one. And I knew what she was getting at. He wasn't a bum to me. He was my dad. And so my heart broke. I was remembering when he taught me how to throw a spiral. He made me feel safe when I was afraid. All those childhood memories where he was a provider. And I told the maitre d', no, he's with me, and we sat down, we started to eat, and my dad felt like he deserved all of his hardship because of the decisions he had made. And again, I think how so often for many of us we make mistakes, but the place of believing that because of a mistake you're unworthy of any help or love, that space of hopelessness. I was angry. That's why I went to find him. But that forgiveness and the power of forgiveness, it's transformative. It was for me. And, it wasn't now about our past. It was more about what our future would be. And my dad said he was fine. He didn't need anything. And I was like, "Dad, you look like you need some help. I mean, how do you live? How do you eat?" And he said there was this woman that had a catering business that at the end of her day, instead of throwing food away, she fed the homeless there in Portland. And so my dad said he was the beneficiary of her generosity. Needless to say, I flew home from Oregon changed. I could no longer see someone in need as a stranger. I saw him as my dad. I saw him as a brother, a sister. And I thought of this woman who probably had a family and obligations and all of that to get to, but rather than calling it a night, she went the extra mile to make sure a stranger got something to eat. And so an ad for the food bank went to help, and it just became who I was to be. And now, all these years later, just trying to make sure people get nourishment, get food. My dad has passed. I know he would be proud. For anyone, it's tough to admit that they're in need, and I don't know that my dad ever would admit that he was in that vulnerable place. It's an interesting environment where asking for help sometimes can be thought of as a failure or that you've made a mistake. I think of an experience I had here at the food bank in the lobby. The staff said, "Hey, Eric, can you talk to this young man? He's just very distressed." I went out to talk to him, and he just shared, "I want to be here." He was going to school to be a physician's assistant. And I'm like, wow, that's incredible. And he just said, "My wife and I, we have a couple of kids, and my schooling got to the point that with my job, I couldn't get the last few credit hours in. And so I worked full-time and went to school. My wife worked part-time and watched the kids, and we agreed to switch." He said, I have gone to now part-time work to get those last few credits, and my wife is working full-time but not making as much, and we don't have food to feed our kids. So I said, well, we're going to take care of that. And he just said, my father would be so ashamed of me if he knew I was here. And I just said, well, tell your dad you're on scholarship. Just tell him that, that he should be proud of you. You're in your season of struggle, but that season's going to end. And there are such great things ahead. You've done nothing wrong. You're doing everything that you should. And you're allowing us to do what we should, and that's to help. Thank you for that privilege. But I don't know any parent that isn't bragging that their kid got a scholarship. And for whatever reason, we think of that differently. Like, that's the same level of help. It's support, it's a resource that helps someone get to where they're needing to go. Why isn't food at the local food bank thought of as a scholarship to get someone through that season of struggle, through that bump in the road, through that trial, to get to that better destination that we all want to get to? I think getting into this work in 1993, in the early to mid-90s, there was quite a bit of unemployment. Families were getting some cash supports from the government, and President Clinton campaigned to change welfare. And this welfare reform was to put people back to work and to have this kind of, if you're going to get a benefit, you need to be, engaged and working. And welfare reform changed the landscape of who we fed. I think over the past 2 decades, we moved to feeding the working poor. Everybody had jobs, but still their needs weren't met. And I think it's that reality that I think would beg the question of what type of job. If we're all we believe, in our core, I believe this philosophy that people should work according to their ability, but receive according to their need. And when it comes to kids and seniors, they don't have a lot of ability to work, and so we're going to offset that with support. But able-bodied people, need to be meaningful, engaged in a good cause, and that work provides hope because it's sustainable, and it's so defeating when you go to work every day, but you're still sinking. And I think that's what we saw in this pandemic. I don't need to run the numbers. I think everyone kind of tracks some of the unemployment benefits, but I think they don't understand it. They think that they do. They think, man, those people, I don't know why they're getting this money and da-da-da. But think of it as your child. Think of it as your spouse. It's a strategy of survival. And if you can receive some support that helps you make ends meet, if you could have a job that allows you to pay your bills, that's ultimately what people want. It's not oftentimes offered. I hope that our future is about solving those problems. So if there's one thing that you could do to help, is to be the person that your mom wants you to be. If you do that, the world will be made better. Take care of those you love and really take care of them. It's about families taking care of their family members. It's about neighbors taking care of their neighbors. It's about communities looking after their communities, cities, states, nations, world. If we can just help right at home, it'll go a long way. Our organization is one of many nonprofits engaged in a good cause to help us put food on the table for hungry Texans. You can visit safoodbank.org to help other food banks throughout the United States who are also in need. Visit feedingamerica.org. But all of us can be a hero. Capes are optional. Volunteer, give food, give money, but most of all, bring understanding and raise your voice.